In this video, I'd like to walk students through Chapter 3 of Porphyry's Introduction, which is Lesson 3 in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy's Classical Reasoning 1 course. In Chapter 1, we learned that Porphyry teaches that there are 5 important terms that need to be understood so that we can avoid confusion when we begin the study of Aristotle's categories. And those 5 terms were genus, species, difference, peculiarity, and accident. In Lesson 2, we learned about genus and species. Here in Lesson 3, we're going to learn about the third of those predicables, which is difference. I have in my hand here a printout of the lesson, and this lesson is a difficult lesson to read. Definitely requires some explanation and help from a teacher, which I'm happy to do through this video. But I'd just like you to see the simple structure of this lesson. It starts out at the top of the lesson. Porphyry says a difference is predicated in 3 ways, and then he goes through those 3 ways in the first part of the lesson. And then about halfway through, you'll see Porphyry says, beginning therefore again, and he provides a review, and he presents the information in a different way to help us understand it a little bit better. So you should understand that there's an initial presentation of the 3 ways in which difference is used, and then there's a review that's a little more systematic in how it teaches the same content, but in a better way for us to be able to master it. Okay, so up on the board here, what Porphyry tells us is that difference, the word different, is used in 3 different ways. And we have to ask which of these 3 ways is the way that we should understand the term when we begin the study of Aristotle's categories. So he explains this for us in the beginning of this lesson. He says, difference is predicated in 3 ways. The word difference is used in 3 different ways. And then he says, one thing is said to differ from another commonly. And you can see I have commonly up here as number 1. One thing is said to differ from another commonly when it differs in some respect either from itself or from something else. One thing is said to differ from another commonly when it differs in some respect either from itself or from something else. The point of this is that common difference is a separable accident. To say that 2 things are different commonly means that the difference is separable and accidental. So what does that mean? One clue we have there from Porphyry's explanation is that a thing is able to differ from itself in this way. Okay, so how can a thing differ from itself? It can differ from itself in some quality that's changeable. So for example, today I'm healthy. Tomorrow I may be not healthy. Right now I'm standing. In an hour I may be sitting. These are examples of separable and accidental differences. Okay, there are ways that I can differ from myself at different times. Okay, these are common differences. Just to read the words here of Porphyry, Socrates differs from Plato commonly in that he is another person. Socrates differs from himself commonly when he was a child, as opposed to when he was a man. Socrates differs from himself commonly when he does something and when he ceases to do it. For example, Socrates is sleeping. Socrates is not sleeping. This is to differ commonly. That's the first way that the term difference is used. It's separable, meaning that it can be true at one time and not true at another time for the same thing. It's separable. this quality can be taken away from a thing. Okay? The second way, Porphyry goes on and says, one thing is said to differ peculiarly from another when one thing differs from another by some inseparable accident. So the second way that the term difference is used is when a thing differs from another in some inseparable accident. Now, for the common difference, we saw it was separable and accidental. The peculiar difference is inseparable and accidental. So these are similar in that they're both accidental, but they're different in that common differences are separable and peculiar differences are not separable. Let's look at what Porphyry has to say. An inseparable accident is such as the blue color of one's eye, the crookedness of one's nose, or a scar from a wound when it hardens. And he gives an example. Socrates has blue eyes. Plato does not have blue eyes. The quality of blue eyes is accidental to a person. And we'll see what this means exactly when we study this third meaning of difference. But a peculiar difference is accidental. It's not essential to a thing. And it's inseparable. The color of a man's eyes will never change. It's a way in which he may differ from someone else, and that difference is a permanent difference, okay? As opposed to a separable difference that may be true at one time and not true at another time. So having blue eyes would be an inseparable and accidental difference between two people. That's the example that Porphyry gives us, blue eyes. The third way is for two things to be different most peculiarly. And Porphyry says, one thing is said to differ most peculiarly from another when it varies from it, or when it differs from that other thing by a specific difference. A specific difference. Now, when we hear the word specific, in modern language, we use specific to mean exact. Like, tell me the specific time that it happened. That's not what specific means here. Specific here is referring to species. Remember, we've learned genus and species. Specific has to do with species. So a specific difference is a difference that causes a thing to belong to a species. A specific difference creates a species. All right? So most peculiar difference is called a specific difference. And a specific difference is inseparable, so it's like a peculiar difference, but it's essential. It's not accidental. It's essential. So to differ most peculiarly is to differ inseparably and essentially. And therefore it's called a specific difference, because this kind of difference causes two things to belong to different species. Okay? So these are the three different ways in which things can be said to be different. And just to continue reading Porphyry's words here, he says, one thing is said to differ most peculiarly from another when it varies from it by a specific difference. Thus, man differs from a horse by a specific difference, namely that the man is rational and the horse is not rational. Rational and irrational are specific differences. They're the actual differences that create and identify the different species. Okay? So we have here, pretty simply, easy to understand, 3 different ways in which things are said to differ from one another. The first 2, what's important to know, the first 2 are not the kinds of difference that we're interested in our study of reasoning. These both have to do with quality. Okay? These first 2 kinds of differences have to do with qualities. They answer the question, what kind of thing is this? Difference leads us to the answer to the question, what is this? It's an essential and inseparable difference. It's a specific difference. Okay? So, in our study of classical reasoning, this third use of the term is that which we're going to be interested in. Okay? It's a difference that actually causes 2 things to belong to different species. Okay? That's what Porphyry explains in the first part of lesson 3. Now, he goes on to talk a little more about specific difference, and he says some things that are very, very helpful. If you remember back to lesson 1, the introduction, he said that these 5 predicables, understanding them, will assist us in the doctrine of Aristotle's categories. But he also said they will help us in division of genera and also in definition. And at the time, there was no way for you to know what he was talking about. Well, in this lesson, we can understand what he was talking about. First of all, specific differences are going to allow us to divide a genus into its species. These are the actual differences between things that belong to a common genus that separate them into real species or different classes within that genus. These are real, specific differences. Okay? Now, what's important about that is when we define something, if we need to define a term, the way that we define it is with a simple little formula that I have written up here. The definition of anything is made by stating the genus to which it belongs and its specific difference. That's what a definition is. A definition consists of the genus of a thing and its specific difference. And I can give you a very simple example. I'm going to explain this diagram in a few minutes, but just as an example. If I want to know what is man, what is man? The first thing I'm going to do is state the genus of man. Man is an animal. I state the genus. And the second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to state the specific difference for man. So how is animal divided into species? It's divided into rational animals and irrational animals. This is the difference that divides animal into species. So for man belongs to the genus animal, but the specific difference that establishes the species man is rational. So if I want to write a definition for man, I say man is a rational animal. That's how a definition is formed. Philosophically and logically, a definition consists of the genus and the specific difference of anything. Okay? This is how the doctrine of the predicables that Porphyry is teaching us helps us with definition. Okay? That's what he mentioned in chapter 1. Once you understand what a specific difference is, and once you understand what a genus is, you can now compose definitions of things, true definitions. Okay? And note here that because a specific difference is a certain thing, and a genus is a certain thing that has a definition, the definition of any term can be tested, is either true or false. Okay, so if I define a man as man is a living animal, man is a living animal, maybe I could get some kids to nod and agree that man is a living animal, but it's not the definition of man, because living is not the specific difference that divides the genus animal and gives us the species man. So that would be a false definition. Now you see the challenge that a dictionary faces, trying to give us definitions of every different word that we can think of. It's very difficult and a real philosophical challenge to come up with the true definitions of terms, because we have to actually identify their true genus and their true specific difference. Okay? So this is what it means to give the definition of a thing, to state its genus and its specific difference. And I gave you an example here of man. To give another example, I could say an animal is a sensitive living body. An animal is a sensitive living body. And I could say a plant, which is not on the diagram, a plant is an insensitive living body. So I could state the genus living body, and then for animal, I could say that an animal is a sensible or sensitive living body. If I want to define plant, I could say a plant is an insensitive living body, stating the genus and the specific difference for each different thing. So now you understand what definition truly is, okay? We then go through the rest of the lesson. I think once you understand this, you understand what separable, inseparable, accidental, and essential means. Once you understand these three different ways that difference is used, and you understand what these terms mean, the rest of the lesson is really very simple. I think you can read through it and understand it on your own. There is one section where things get a little confusing, because Porphyry's talking about some ideas that you really have to see illustrated to understand what he's referring to. He starts talking about divisive differences and constitutive differences, and it just sort of comes out of nowhere, and there needs to be some explanation. So what I'd like to do is introduce you to something that I mentioned in a previous lesson, which is the tree of Porphyry. The tree of Porphyry. And so I've got this tree drawn on the board here because this is an example of a Porphyrian tree. And what I'd like to do is just walk you through some things quickly. At the bottom of the tree, you'll see we have the name Socrates, which is the name of an individual. Okay, Socrates. Above that, we have the species to which this individual belongs, man. Above man, we have the genus to which the species man belongs. We then have a genus to which animal belongs as a species. Then we have another genus to which living body belongs as a species. And then lastly, we have substance, which is the most general genus to which this body belongs as species. Okay, so we have this tree of individual, most special species, species and genus, species and genus, species and genus, most general genus. And if you studied lesson 2, you'll understand exactly what I mean when I say what I just said. If you don't understand what I just said, you need to go back and review lesson 2. Okay? So you should understand the middle of this tree, because we learned about that in lesson 2. However, here in lesson 3, we have a list of terms on each side here. And these are differences. These are specific differences. Okay? And here's how what this tree shows us. If we take the genus substance, we can divide it by its specific differences. The specific difference for the genus substance would be corporeal or incorporeal. So we either have a corporeal or bodily substance or an incorporeal or bodiless substance. If we have a corporeal substance, we call that a body. Okay? A corporeal substance is a body. So the difference, corporeal, and I'm just going to put a C here. Corporeal, the difference, constitutes the species body. And I'll put a D here. As regards substance, corporeal is divisive. It's the difference by which the genus is divided. Okay, so corporeal and incorporeal divide substance. They're the divisive differences. But corporeal, as a difference, constitutes body. Okay? Body is constituted of corporeal as a difference. If I continue on, body divides into two different species based on these specific differences. We have an animated body, so animated is a specific difference, and inanimated is its contrary. Animated divides body, so I can put D here, but animated constitutes living body. So a living body is an animated body. A body is a corporeal substance. All right? The difference animated constitutes living body and divides the genus body. Now watch this. I can also describe some item on this tree by walking through its differences back up to the most general genus. So if I asked, what is a living body? A living body is an animated body. That's a definition. But watch what I can also do. A living body is an animated, corporeal substance. A living body is an animated, corporeal substance. A living body is an animated body. Definition. A living body is an animated, corporeal substance. So I can just gather up the differences on the tree and have a description of this thing. And we go on. If we want to divide the genus living body, we can divide it into sensitive and insensitive. That's a divisive difference. But sensitive constitutes animal. So sensitive as a difference is constitutive with reference to animal, but is divisive with reference to living body. If I want to define animal, I say an animal is a sensitive living body. I could also say an animal is a sensitive, animate, corporeal substance. Okay? But the proper definition would be animal is a sensitive living body, because this term living body is already defined as we move up the tree. Lastly, I can divide animal with the specific difference rational and irrational. And rational, as a specific difference, constitutes the species man. So rational with respect to animal is divisive, but rational with respect to man is constitutive, because rational constitutes man as its specific difference. If I want to define man, I simply say that man is a rational animal. But I can also say man is a rational, sensitive, animate, corporeal substance. All right? So the tree of Porphyry, which takes some time to get used to, helps us to understand not only the relationships between an individual, a most special species, and a most general genus, but all the subaltern or media between the extremes. Remember that from lesson 2. And not only that, but we can also understand the specific differences that divide each genus and constitute each species as we move down the tree. So this is called the Porphyrian tree. Now, realize as we look at this tree, we're just choosing one answer to each of these different sets of options. For example, we said a substance could be corporeal or incorporeal. And then we gave the answer, or we gave the species constituted by corporeal, which is body. But what about incorporeal? It would be spirit. Okay, so we would have a different tree where an incorporeal substance is a spirit. Okay, we said a body can be animate or inanimate, and we chose animate body, which is a living body. But we could also choose inanimate body, which would be an inanimate or a non-living body. We chose sensitive living body, and that constituted the species animal. But we could have also said insensitive living body and produced the species plant. And lastly, we chose to go with rational animal, which constituted man. But we could have gone with irrational animal, which would constitute beast or a common animal. An irrational animal, cattle, birds, fish, etc. All right, so this is the tree of Porphyry. And I'm not saying that in lesson 3 you should understand this. Okay, this is a bit complicated, and it takes some time. It takes time for you just to draw it out, think about it, draw it out again, think about it, and you'll have to go through that a few times until it really starts to click and you see and understand what the tree of Porphyry shows. But Porphyry has this in mind when he writes some of these paragraphs, and without having this in mind, it's like reading gibberish sometimes. So in some of these paragraphs, you'll see him using the terms divisive and constitutive, and this is what he's referring to. So I hope that image of the tree, and you can watch this video again and allow me to go through that explanation again. But what you see here in this image will help to understand what Porphyry's talking about in some of these paragraphs. Now, the most important thing is remembering that the goal of our study of this lesson is to learn the proper meaning of the term difference. So, for example, the last page or so of the lesson, the last few paragraphs, he's talking about, like he did in the the second chapter, he's talking about bad definitions that we're not going to use. So you can spend a lot of time racking your brain trying to master the wrong definitions, but it's a waste of time. What's really important in this lesson is that you understand this third way of using the term difference as a specific difference. Make sure that you can explain what a specific difference is. Make sure you know what it means to be inseparable and essential to a thing, because that's what this lesson is really seeking to do. That's the objective of this lesson to help us understand this and distinguish this from these two other simple uses of the term difference. You should understand how understanding the right definition of genus and the right definition of specific difference leads us to give proper definitions of terms. And then you should have this, which is our official definition of specific difference, which is in the very last paragraph, the very last sentence of the lesson. Porphyry writes, "Hence, specific differences will be those which produce another species and which are assumed in explaining the nature of a thing." This is our definition of specific difference, which is what we really mean by the term difference when we talk about the 5 predicables. Okay, so that's everything that's contained in chapter 3. The only other thing I should probably note is that this true definition, in the second half of the lesson, you'll see that Porphyry gives a couple other definitions. As he normally does, he tells us different ways in which the term difference is used. One paragraph begins, "These also defining, they say difference is that which blah, blah, blah." That's a wrong definition. And then the next paragraph says, "They also define difference as follows. Difference is that which is predicated blah, blah, blah." That's another wrong definition. And then later on, he finally gets to the paragraph that begins, "Those, however, who more elegantly discuss what pertains to difference." So the paragraph that begins with, "Those who more elegantly discuss," there he gives the right definition. Okay, so he gives this definition, but with a little more explanation, and then he summarizes this in the last paragraph, the last line of the last paragraph. So, in lesson 3, our topic is the 3rd predicable, which is difference. Porphyry explains to us that we need to be careful because difference is used in 3 different ways. It's used commonly with separable accidents. It's used peculiarly with inseparable accidents, both of which simply identify qualities. But it's used in a 3rd way. It's used inseparably and essentially to identify specific differences. This is our desired definition. Okay? As I said, how this relates to definition, the official definition for a specific difference, and then the illustration of the Porphyrian tree to help us understand what he's talking about when he's talking about divisive and constitutive differences. Okay? Again, you can watch this video and review that, and you'll see that it makes sense of the lesson. Right now we're at about 34 minutes, so trying to keep the video short, I'm going to stop there. That's everything that's contained in lesson 3. I hope that's a helpful explanation of what you'll find in your reading. You now have to do the work of studying, going through the lesson, and making this information your own. You're going to have to read and reread until everything is clear and makes good sense. Use the video to help you as you go. And if you get stuck, contact me and let me know what you need help with, and I'll help you get over any difficult points. But the time comes when you've got to do the work to make this lesson your own. I can stand here and explain it and go through each of the points and organize it nicely and lay it all out in an outline and give an illustration but I've spent a lot of time studying these lessons, and I've had to do these outlines over and over and over again until I can finally look at the lesson, look at my outline and say, I really got it this time. Because remember, what we learn in metaphysics with Aristotle, the test of whether you understand something is whether or not you can teach it. That's the ultimate test. So time for you to get to work, study, work hard, use the video to help, and if you get stuck, reach out and ask for help, and I'll help you with anything that you need explained, or just anything that you would like to discuss or have explained in a little more detail. Just send me an email or post on the forum. I hope that's a helpful introduction to lesson 3 of Porphyry's introduction. In our next lesson, we're going to move on and learn peculiarity and accident and wrap up with the 5 predicables. I hope that's helpful. God bless your studies.